Lieutenant He Jin stood at the viewing window of Nexus Station's docking bay. His antennae twitched with nervous energy as he watched the prisoner transport ship approach. After 5 years of working in the galaxy's most secure prison, this was his first time handling a human prisoner. The transport ship's engines glowed blue against the black of space as it slowly entered the docking bay. He Jin checked his tablet again, reading the prisoner's file for the 10th time that morning. Dr. Lee Sun-mai, human female, age 34, charged with stealing classified research data from the Galactic Alliance's top science facility. Interesting, isn't it? A voice said behind him. He Jin turned to see his friend Officer Kang Min-ho walking up to join him at the window. All these special procedures just for one small human. He Jin nodded. The transfer orders had been unusually specific. The prisoner was to be kept in complete isolation, with no contact with other species. Even the route to her cell had to be cleared of all other prisoners during transport. It seems excessive, He Jin said, watching the ship's landing gear extend. The scans show she has no cybernetic enhancements, no hidden weapons, nothing. She's just normal. Min-ho laughed. That's what makes humans dangerous. They look normal until they're not. The ship landed with a soft thud. He Jin straightened his uniform and checked that his stun baton was charged. I still don't understand why we're using the high security protocols. Most of our prisoners are 3 times stronger than humans. We have warriors from the crystal worlds who can bend metal bars with their bare hands. You must be new to human prisoners, Min-ho said, his expression growing serious. Trust me, physical strength isn't everything. The ship's door opened with a hiss of pressurized air. 4 armed guards emerged first, their weapons ready. Behind them walked a small figure in white prison clothes. Dr. Lee Sun-mai was shorter than He Jin had expected, with straight black hair tied back in a simple style. Her hands were bound in front of her with energy cuffs, but she walked with the calm confidence of someone taking a pleasant morning stroll. He Jin watched as she looked around the docking bay, her eyes taking in every detail. There was something unsettling about her gaze, not angry or scared like most new prisoners, but curious, like she was solving a puzzle. Remember the incident at Prison Station 7? Min-ho asked quietly. The mass escape. That was 3 years ago, He Jin said. What about it? They had a human prisoner there too. Just one. Within 2 months, 30 prisoners escaped. No one died, but the station's security systems were completely compromised. They never figured out how the human did it. She never even left her cell. He Jin looked back at Dr. Sun-mai. She had stopped walking and was now looking directly at him through the viewing window. A small smile appeared on her face, and she nodded politely in his direction. Despite himself, He Jin felt a shiver run down his spine. Head of security wants to see you, Min-ho said, checking his communicator. They're reviewing the isolation protocols again. He Jin nodded, unable to look away from the human prisoner. As he turned to leave, he heard Min-ho add, "Oh, and He Jin, don't let her talk to you too much. Humans have a way with words that makes you forget they're prisoners at all." As He Jin walked to the security office, he couldn't shake the feeling that this assignment would change everything he thought he knew about handling prisoners. The human had looked so harmless, and that was exactly what worried him most. Behind him, Dr. Sun-mai was already being escorted to her cell, her small smile never wavering. The sound of her footsteps echoed through the corridor, steady and unhurried, like someone who had all the time in the world. Station Commander Park Do-young's office was unlike anything else on Nexus Station. While the rest of the station was all smooth metal and bright lights, his office had real wooden furniture from Earth. He Jin found himself staring at the dark wooden desk as Commander Do-young reviewed the transfer documents. "Lieutenant He Jin," Do-young said without looking up, "how much do you know about human prisoners?" "Only what's in the standard training materials, sir," He Jin replied. "They're physically weaker than most species, have no natural defenses, and require specific environmental controls. Do Young placed his tablet on the desk and looked up. His cybernetic eye glowed softly blue in the dim light. Let me tell you a story. 10 years ago, I was a junior officer like you. We had a human prisoner, a simple thief. We fought the same thing. Physically weak, no threat. We put him in with the general population. The Jin waited as Do Young stood and walked to the window overlooking the prison blocks below. Within a week, he had taught 3 Cracks prisoners how to disable their cell force fields using nothing but their food trays. In 2 weeks, he had convinced a guard to smuggle in educational materials. Just history books, he said. Nothing dangerous. Do Young's voice grew harder. In 1 month, we had a full-scale riot. The human had used those history books to teach the other prisoners about ancient war tactics. But sir, He Jin said carefully, Dr. Lee Sunmai is a physicist, not a soldier. Do Young turned sharply. All humans are dangerous, Lieutenant. They don't need to be soldiers. They have something worse. They can teach. They can organize. They can make others believe in impossible things. He walked back to his desk and pressed a button. A hologram appeared, showing Dr. Sunmai in her cell. She was sitting cross-legged on her bed, reading a approved novel. Look at her, Du Young said. What do you see? He Jin studied the image. She seems calm. Too calm, Du Young corrected. Most new prisoners pace, sleep, or show signs of stress. She's studying, learning, already planning something. He switched off the hologram and handed He Jin a datapad. These are the new protocols for human prisoners. Read them carefully. No contact with other prisoners. No shared exercise time. No materials that could be used to write or draw. Even her conversations with guards must be recorded and analyzed. Isn't that extreme? He Jin asked, scanning the long list of restrictions. Do Young's cybernetic eye flashed. 3 years ago, a human female orchestrated a mass escape from prison station 7 without ever leaving her cell. 2 years before that, a human male turned an entire block of violent prisoners into a debate club, then used their daily discussion time to plan a takeover of the station's environmental systems. He sat back down at his desk. The most dangerous thing about humans, Lieutenant, is that they don't try to break out alone. They make friends. They teach. They inspire. And before you know it, you're not dealing with one clever human. You're dealing with an army of prisoners who believe they can do the impossible. He Jin clutched the datapad tighter. I understand, sir. No, you don't. Not yet. Du Young's voice softened slightly. But you will. Just follow the protocols. No matter how reasonable her requests seem, no matter how harmless her questions appear. Remember, humans don't need weapons or strength. Their minds are dangerous enough. As He Jin left the office, he glanced at the security feed on his tablet. Dr. Sunmai had finished her book and was now doing simple exercises in her cell. She looked straight at the camera and smiled, as if she knew they were watching, as if she knew exactly what they were saying about her. He Jin quickly switched off the feed. Perhaps Commander Do Young was right. Perhaps the protocols weren't extreme enough. He Jin sat in the monitoring room, his eyes fixed on the wall of screens showing different angles of Dr. Sunmai's cell. It was the 3rd week of his observation duty, and he was starting to understand Commander Do Young's warnings. The human prisoner had a routine. Every morning, she would wake up exactly 10 minutes before the lights turned on. She would do exercises, simple movements that seemed to focus on flexibility rather than strength. Then she would sit quietly, facing the wall, for exactly 30 minutes. Today was no different. He Jin watched as she completed her morning stretches, but something caught his attention. She always faced the same wall during her quiet time, the one with the maintenance panel behind it. Anything unusual? Officer Kang Minho asked, bringing 2 cups of hot drink to the monitoring station. No, He Jin said, accepting 1 cup. Just the same routine. But I've been thinking about something. Minho sat down in the second chair. What's on your mind? She never asks for anything. Most prisoners demand things. Better food, more exercise time, entertainment. She just watches, observes. On the screen, Dr. Sunbai had finished her quiet time and was now reading one of the approved books. She turned each page slowly, methodically. Have you noticed she only reads each book once? He-jin continued. But she remembers everything. Yesterday, Gardley asked her about a story she read 2 weeks ago. She quoted entire passages perfectly. Min-ho leaned forward, studying the screens. That's not unusual. Many species have good memory. It's not just memory, He-jin said. She remembers patterns. Last week, she mentioned to a guard that the air recycling system sounds different on Thursdays. She was right. That's when they run the weekly maintenance cycle. As they watched, a maintenance worker appeared in the corridor outside Dr. Sunmi's cell. Right on schedule, just like every Tuesday at 900 hours. The worker began checking the corridor's lighting systems. Dr. Sunmi didn't look up from her book, but He-jin noticed her eyes had stopped moving across the pages. She's listening, he said quietly. She always reads during maintenance checks, but she's not really reading. She's listening to the sounds of the tools, the equipment, the workers talking. Min-ho frowned. That's concerning. Should we report it? Report what? That she has good hearing. That she notices patterns. She hasn't broken any rules. On the screen, the maintenance worker finished his checks and moved on. Dr. Sunmi turned another page in her book, her movements as calm and measured as always. Commander Du-young was right. He-jin said, she's studying us. All of us. The guards, the workers, the systems. She's building a map in her head of how everything works. But why? Min-ho asked. She's in maximum security. Even if she knows the schedules, she can't do anything from inside that cell. He-jin remembered the stories about Prison Station 7. About the human prisoner who never left her cell but somehow organized a mass escape. Maybe that's what makes humans so dangerous, he said. They don't need to do anything themselves. They just need to understand how everything works. And then, he trailed off as he noticed something on the screen. Dr. Sunmi had looked directly at the camera again, that same small smile on her face. Then she returned to her book, turning another page with deliberate slowness. And then, Min-ho prompted. And then they wait for the right moment to share that knowledge with someone who can use it. They sat in silence, watching the screens. Dr. Sunmi continued reading, page by page, while the station's systems hummed and whirred around her in their predictable patterns. He-jin couldn't shake the feeling that they were missing something obvious, something hiding in plain sight. Just like the human prisoner, they would have to wait to find out what it was. 1 month had passed since Dr. Lee Sunmi's arrival at Nexus Station. He-jin noticed that more guards were volunteering for the morning shift near her cell. At first, he thought it was because she was an easy prisoner to watch. Now he knew better. She tells the most amazing stories, Guard Yoon Dae-ho said during their morning briefing. Yesterday, she explained how ancient humans crossed entire oceans in wooden boats, using only stars to guide them. He-jin frowned. You're not supposed to have long conversations with her. It's just history, another guard, Officer Song Ji-soo, said. What's wrong with learning about Earth's past? Besides, she makes it interesting. Did you know humans once built huge pyramids without any modern technology? He-jin watched as the guards discussed Sunmi's stories. They seemed different today, more animated, more curious. He checked his tablet, reviewing the recordings from her conversations over the past week. The stories were always about human history, how they survived in harsh conditions, how they solved problems with limited resources, how small groups overcame larger, stronger opponents. Lieutenant, a voice called. He-jin turned to see Kim Ta-won, one of the senior guards, walking toward him. Ta-won's expression was serious. We need to talk, Ta-won said quietly. In private. They walked to an empty monitoring room. Taiwan closed the door and checked that no one was nearby. "Something's missing from the medical bay," he said. "Small things. A few basic tools during her last health check. Some cleaning supplies after her shower period." The Jinn felt his antennae twitch. "Did you report it?" "That's the problem. Each item is so small, it's barely worth mentioning. A missing cloth here, a misplaced tool there. Nothing that would trigger an alert." On the monitoring screen, they could see Dr. Sunmai in her cell. She was telling another story to the morning guard, her hands moving as she described something. The guard was leaning forward, completely focused on her words. "Watch this," Taiwan said. He switched to recordings from the past week. Every time Sunmai told a story, she made the same hand gestures. Her movements looked random, casual. But when Taiwan played the recordings faster, Hejin saw it. "It's a pattern," he said. Taiwan nodded. "She repeats the same gestures in different stories. And the other prisoners who pass by during medical transport, they watch her. They're learning something." Hejin remembered Commander Do Young's warning about the human who taught war tactics through history books. "She's not just telling stories, is she?" "No," Taiwan said. "I think she's teaching them something. But we can't prove it. We can't even say what she's teaching. Every word she says is just human history." They watched as on the screen, Sunmai finished her story. The guard thanked her and walked away, still thinking about ancient humans and their clever solutions to impossible problems. "What should we do?" Hejin asked. "That's why I came to you," Taiwan said. "You've been watching her the closest. Have you noticed anything else unusual?" Hejin thought about the maintenance schedules she had memorized, the missing items that seemed too small to report, the guards who now spent their free time discussing human history. "She's building something," he said slowly. "Not with tools or weapons. She's building it with stories and ideas, and we can't stop her because technically, she's not breaking any rules." They stood in silence, watching the monitors. In her cell, Dr. Sunmai had returned to her usual routine, reading a book with that same small smile on her face. The most dangerous weapon in the prison wasn't something they could detect with scanners or stop with force fields. It was knowledge, spreading from cell to cell, guard to guard, building into something they couldn't see until it was too late. The weekly security meeting felt different today. Hejin noticed the tension in the room as Commander Do Young reviewed the latest reports. The commander's cybernetic eye glowed brighter than usual, a sign that he was processing more data than normal. "Our human prisoner has been here for 6 weeks," Do Young said, looking at each officer in turn. "Report your observations." Officer Song Ji-soo spoke first. "Dr. Lee maintains perfect behavior. No violations of any kind." "Too perfect," Kim Ta-won added. His voice was quiet but firm. "She follows every rule exactly. She never makes mistakes." Hejin watched as Do Young's expression darkened. The commander understood what Ta-won meant. No one was that perfect unless they were hiding something. "There's more," Ta-won continued. "During her medical check yesterday, I noticed something strange about the other prisoners." The room grew silent. Even the usual hum of the station's systems seemed quieter. "The violent ones, the ones we can barely control. They're different now," Ta-won explained. "They sit quietly. They watch. They'd wait." It started after they passed by her cell during transport to the medical bay. Hejin opened his tablet and displayed the security footage. "Look at this," he said, pointing to a recording from the previous day. A group of prisoners was being moved through the corridor. As they passed Dr. Sunmai's cell, each one made a small gesture, so slight it seemed accidental. "They're communicating," Do Young said. It wasn't a question. "Yes, sir," Hejin replied. "We've identified 12 different hand signals. They look like natural movements, but they're too consistent to be random." Officer Kang Minho, who had been quiet until now, stepped forward. "That's not all," he said. "The maintenance workers report unusual wear patterns on some equipment. Nothing broken, but things aren't lasting as long as they should. Do-young stood and walked to the window overlooking the prison blocks. She's preparing something, he said, using the maintenance schedule she memorized, the tools that went missing, the guards she's influenced with her stories. Sir, Hajin interrupted, shouldn't we move her to a different facility? The commander turned, his cybernetic eye flashing. It's too late for that. Moving her now would only trigger whatever she's planning. We need to understand what she's built before we can stop it. Taiwan cleared his throat. There's one more thing, he said. The power consumption in her cell block has increased by 2%. It's within normal variation. But nothing about her is normal variation. Du-young finished. He pressed a button on his desk, bringing up a holographic display of the station's systems. Show me the pattern. As they studied the power readings, Hojin noticed something else. The other prisoners had changed their routines too. They exercised at different times, used the common areas differently. Small changes, almost invisible unless you knew to look for them. Sir, Hajin said slowly, I don't think we're containing her. I think she's containing us. The room fell silent again as the implications sank in. They had followed every protocol, maintained every security measure. But somehow, without ever leaving her cell, without breaking a single rule, Dr. Lee Sunmai had turned their own prison into her tool. The question wasn't what she was planning anymore. The question was, were they already too late to stop it? The day began like any other on Nexus Station. Hajin arrived for his morning shift and checked the security feeds. Dr. Lee Sunmai was doing her usual exercises, facing the maintenance panel wall. Everything seemed normal. Then the power flickered. Just the weekly maintenance check, Officer Song Ji-soo said from her station. Engineering scheduled it for today. Hajin checked his tablet. The maintenance was scheduled, but something felt wrong. He brought up Dr. Sunmi's surveillance feed again. She had stopped exercising and was sitting on her bed, reading. Her posture was relaxed, but her eyes weren't moving across the pages. The power flickered again. This time, the backup systems hummed to life. Standard procedure during maintenance. But Hojin noticed the other prisoners were all in their cells, sitting quietly, waiting. Check the guard rotations, he said suddenly. Now. Ji-soo typed quickly on her console. Half the morning shift called in sick. They're all guards who worked near the human cell. Hajin reached for his communicator to alert Commander Do-young. But before he could press the button, all the lights went out. When the emergency lights came on 3 seconds later, every cell door in the station was open. How? Ji-soo whispered. The security systems are separate. The backup power shouldn't affect the locks. But Hojin understood now. The missing tools, the worn equipment, the power fluctuations. Dr. Sunmai hadn't just been teaching the other prisoners history. She had been teaching them about Earth's prison breaks, resistance movements, and guerrilla tactics, all hidden in stories about human ingenuity and survival. Through the security cameras, they'd watched as prisoners emerged from their cells. There was no chaos, no violence. They moved with purpose, following patterns they had practiced in their daily routines for weeks. Look at their hands, Hajin said, pointing to the screen. The prisoners were using the hand signals they had learned from passing Dr. Sunmi's cell. They were coordinating, organizing into groups, each with a specific task. The station's security forces tried to respond, but they were too late. The maintenance systems that Dr. Sunmai had studied so carefully were now being used against them. Doors sealed at exactly the right moments. Environmental controls redirected security teams into dead ends. In her cell, Dr. Sunmai finally put down her book and stood up. She walked to the maintenance panel she had faced every morning. With precise movements, she removed the panel, revealing the modified circuitry behind it. All those missing items, all those tiny changes during maintenance checks had led to this moment. She didn't just plan an escape. Hajin realized. She turned the entire prison population into a coordinated force. Every story about human history was a lesson. Every shared movement was practice. Every guard who listened to her tales became part of her plan without knowing it. Commander Do Young's voice crackled over the emergency channel. All personnel, initiate Protocol 7. The station is compromised. Repeat, the station is. The communication cut off. Through the cameras, Hu Jin watched as groups of prisoners secured key areas of the station. They moved with the efficiency of a trained military unit, using tactics straight from Earth's history books. Dr. Sun Mai stepped out of her cell. She looked directly at the nearest camera and smiled. Then she began walking toward the command center, surrounded by prisoners who moved as if they had been working together for years instead of minutes. The revolution she had built, piece by piece, story by story, was finally revealing itself. And there wasn't a single broken rule they could point to that could have stopped it. Commander Park Do-young stood in his office, watching through his window as groups of prisoners moved through the station with military precision. His cybernetic eye recorded everything, analyzing patterns he should have seen weeks ago. The door opened, and He Jin was brought in by two prisoners. Dr. Lee Sunbai followed them, still wearing her white prison uniform, still wearing that small smile. Impressive security system, she said, looking around the office. Earth wood furniture. An interesting choice. Do-young turned to face her. You never meant to escape alone, he said. It wasn't a question. Escape. Sun Mei shook her head. That was never the goal. I wanted to teach. He Jin watched as she walked to the commander's desk and sat down. The prisoners who had brought him in stood quietly by the door, waiting for instructions they had somehow learned through casual gestures and historical stories. Every human child learns about Earth's history, Sun Mei continued, about how small groups survived against impossible odds, how knowledge passed secretly through generations, how resistance movements organized under the strictest control. The stories you told the guards, He Jin said, understanding finally dawning. They weren't just stories. They were instruction manuals. Sun Mei nodded. Hidden in plain sight. When I told them about ancient sailors using stars to navigate, I was teaching coordination. When I spoke about pyramid builders, I was teaching logistics. Every story had a lesson, and every lesson had a purpose. Through the window, they could see more groups of prisoners securing different sections of the station. There was no violence, no chaos. Everything moved according to a plan that had been practiced in tiny pieces over weeks. But why? Do-young asked. Why teach them all this? Because that's what humans do, Sun Mai replied simply. We share knowledge. We teach others to be stronger, smarter, more capable. You put me in isolation to prevent me from influencing others, but isolation just gave me a perfect classroom. Every passing prisoner, every guard rotation, every maintenance check became a chance to teach. He Jin remembered all the small changes he had noticed. The missing items, the worn equipment. You were teaching them to use everything around them. Just like humans have always done, Sun Mei agreed. You focused so much on preventing a physical escape that you never considered a different kind of revolution. One built on knowledge, cooperation, and patience. Commander Do-young's cybernetic eye flashed as he processed this new understanding. This is why human prisoners are kept separate, he said slowly. Not because they might escape, but because they turn prisons into schools. They turn prisoners into students. They turn isolation into opportunity. Sun Mei stood up and walked to the window. Below, the station continued its transformation, orchestrated by prisoners who had learned to work together through nothing more than stories and subtle signals. Humans don't need weapons or technology to be dangerous, she said. We just need someone to teach, someone to learn. And most importantly, she turned to face them, her smile unchanged. Someone who underestimates the power of shared knowledge. He Jin looked at the commander, then back at Dr. Sun Mei. They had followed every security protocol, maintained every barrier, enforced every rule. But they had never guarded against the most human weapon of all, the ability to turn any group of individuals into a unified force through nothing more than stories and ideas. 3 months after the events at Nexus Station, Lieutenant He Jin stood before the Galactic Alliance Security Council. The large chamber was filled with representatives from every major species in the galaxy. They had gathered to hear his report on new security measures for human prisoners. The incident at Nexus Station taught us an important lesson. He Jin began, his voice steady. We were not containing human prisoners. We were giving them classrooms. He activated a holographic display showing Dr. Lee Sunmi's cell. We focused on physical security, walls, force fields, isolation. But humans don't need physical contact to be dangerous. They don't need weapons or technology. They only need an audience willing to learn. The council members watched as he showed them recordings from the station, guards listening to historical stories, prisoners making small gestures as they passed by, maintenance workers following their normal routines, all of it looking so harmless until it came together. Dr. Lee Sunmi never broke a single rule, He Jin continued. She never committed a single act of violence. Instead, she taught. She shared knowledge. She turned every restriction into a teaching opportunity. Commander Park Do-young, standing at the back of the chamber, nodded slowly. His cybernetic eye had been upgraded after the incident, but some lessons couldn't be programmed. We have created new protocols, He Jin said, bringing up another display. But these are not just security measures. These are acknowledgments of what makes humans truly dangerous in our prisons. He began explaining the new rules. Human prisoners would not only be kept separate from others, they would be kept separate from each other. Their stories would be monitored not just for escape plans, but for any kind of teaching. Even their smallest gestures would be analyzed for patterns. But most importantly, He Jin said, we must understand that humans don't try to break out of prisons. They turn prisons into something else entirely. They transform isolation into education, restrictions into opportunities, and strangers into allies. The council members murmured among themselves. One of them, a tall crystalline being, spoke up. What happened to Dr. Lee Sunmi? He Jin paused before answering. She was transferred to a new facility, designed with these lessons in mind. But her influence remains. The prisoners she taught are now teaching others. The knowledge she shared continues to spread. He brought up one final image, a simple drawing found in a cell after the incident. It showed a small figure teaching a group of larger ones, with words in many different languages written below. Knowledge breaks stronger chains than force. This is why human prisoners must be held separately, He Jin concluded, not because they might escape, but because they never see prison as a final destination. To them, it's just another place to teach, to share, to transform. And in doing so, they remind us of a truth we had forgotten. The most powerful weapon in the galaxy isn't strength or technology. It's the ability to share knowledge and inspire others to believe in impossible things. The council chamber fell silent as his words sank in. In the back, Commander Do-young touched his cybernetic eye, remembering the day he had watched his perfect prison system transform into a perfectly coordinated revolution. They had learned their lesson. But somewhere out there, in cells across the galaxy, humans were still teaching, still sharing stories, still turning prisons into classrooms, one lesson at a time.